Now listen closely, because this part requires your full attention. What you experienced was not random. It was not just people being difficult, emotional misunderstandings, or unfortunate timing. There was something deeper unfolding behind the scenes, something you could feel, but never fully explain. Because the truth is, there was a hidden battle happening around you, and most of it took place where your eyes could not see and your ears could not hear. While you were going about your life, trying to stay focused, trying to keep your peace, there were conversations happening that never included you. Rooms where your name was spoken, but your truth was not present. Situations where your actions were twisted, your intentions misunderstood, and your silence interpreted as something it was never meant to be. And the most unsettling part is this: some of it came from people you never expected. People who knew your story but chose a different version. People who saw your heart but questioned your motives. People who had access to you but used that access against you. And you felt it. Even when you did have proof, something inside you kept whispering, something isn't right. You tried to ignore it. You told yourself not to overthink. You gave people the benefit of the doubt. But that inner discomfort never fully left. It's because your spirit was picking up on what your mind was trying to rationalize. There were subtle shifts, energy that changed without explanation, words that sounded normal on the surface, but carried something heavier underneath, looks that lingered just a second too long, silence that felt intentional, distance that didn't make sense. And you kept asking yourself, why does this feel off? But you never got a clear answer, because the truth was hidden. What you didn't see was the quiet formation of opposition. Not loud, not obvious, not aggressive, but strategic. It didn't come at you directly. It worked through misunderstanding, through assumption, through miscommunication. It worked through moments designed to confuse you, to make you question yourself, to make you hesitate when you should have stood firm. And slowly, without even realizing it, it began to affect you. You started second-guessing your instincts. You started replaying conversations in your head. You started adjusting yourself, shrinking yourself, trying to avoid tension you didn't even create. That was not your nature. That was pressure. Pressure created by something that was never meant to uplift you, but to unsettle you. And here is what changes everything. It was intentional. Not always from a place of pure malice, but from insecurity, from comparison, from discomfort with your growth. Because when you started evolving, when you started seeing things differently, when you started moving with more awareness, something about that made others uneasy. Your peace became unfamiliar to them. Your growth became uncomfortable for them. Your clarity began to expose what they were not ready to confront within themselves. So instead of adjusting themselves, they adjusted their perception of you. They questioned you instead of understanding you. They distanced themselves instead of growing with you. They spoke around you instead of speaking to you. And this is where the hidden battle intensified. Because now it wasn't just misunderstanding. It became narrative. A quiet storyline forming in spaces you were not part of. A version of you being discussed, shaped, and repeated without your voice present to correct it. And the more it circulated, the more it began to influence how people saw you, how they responded to you, how they treated you. And suddenly, you were dealing with reactions that didn't match your reality. You felt judged without explanation. You felt tension without cause. You felt distance without clarity. And it left you confused. But let this settle into your spirit now. What was happening around you was never a reflection of your truth. It was a reflection of their perception. And perception when it is rooted in insecurity, will always distort reality. This is why things felt so heavy, not because you were doing something wrong, but because you were being pulled into something that was never aligned with who you truly are. You were standing in the middle of a situation where truth and assumption were colliding, and for a moment, it felt like assumption was winning. But here is what they did not understand. While they were building their version of you in the dark, God was preserving the truth of you in the light. While they were creating confusion, God was preparing clarity. While they were observing your reactions, God was strengthening your restraint. Because this was never about you defending yourself. It was about you being revealed at the right time. And the time is approaching. What was hidden is not going to stay hidden. What was spoken in quiet places is not going to remain silent. And the same situation that made you question yourself is about to show you exactly why it happened the way it did. You were not being pushed out. You were being pulled away. You were not being misunderstood by accident. You were being separated with purpose. And as you begin to see this clearly, something inside you will shift again. Not confusion this time, but confidence. Not doubt, but discernment. Because now you're starting to understand this was never just about people. It was positioning. And what comes next will reveal why everything had to unfold this way. Type ISE clearly now in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 2222 is now activated. And now listen closely, because this part requires your full attention. What you experienced was not random. It was not just people being difficult, emotional misunderstandings, or unfortunate timing. There was something deeper unfolding behind the scenes, something you could feel, but never fully explain. Because the truth is, there was a hidden battle happening around you, and most of it took place where your eyes could not see and your ears could not hear. While you were going about your life, trying to stay focused, trying to keep your peace, there were conversations happening that never included you. Rooms where your name was spoken, but your truth was not present. Situations where your actions were twisted, your intentions misunderstood, and your silence interpreted as something it was never meant to be. And the most unsettling part is this: some of it came from people you never expected. People who knew your story, but chose a different version. People who saw your heart, but questioned your motives. People who had access to you, but used that access against you. And you felt it. Even when you didn't have proof, something inside you kept whispering that something wasn't right. You tried to ignore it. You told yourself not to overthink. You gave people the benefit of the doubt. But that inner discomfort never fully left. That's because your spirit was picking up on what your mind was trying to rationalize. There were subtle shifts. Energy that changed without explanation. Words that sounded normal on the surface, but carried something heavier underneath. Looks that lingered just a second too long. Silence that felt intentional. Distance that didn't make sense. And you kept asking yourself why it felt off, but you never got a clear answer. Because the truth was hidden. What you didn't see was the quiet formation of opposition. Not loud, not obvious, not aggressive, but strategic. It didn't come at you directly. It worked through misunderstanding, through assumption, through miscommunication. It worked through moments designed to confuse you, to make you question yourself, to make you hesitate when you should have stood firm. And slowly, without even realizing it, it began to affect you. You started second-guessing your instincts. You started replaying conversations in your head. You started adjusting yourself, shrinking yourself, trying to avoid tension you didn't even create. That was not your nature. That was pressure. Pressure created by something that was never meant to uplift you, but to unsettle you. And here is what changes everything. It was intentional. Not always from a place of pure malice, but from insecurity, from comparison, from discomfort with your growth. Because when you started evolving, when you started seeing things differently, when you started moving with more awareness, something about that made others uneasy. Your peace became unfamiliar to them. Your growth became uncomfortable for them. Your clarity began to expose what they were not ready to confront within themselves. So instead of adjusting themselves, they adjusted their perception of you. They questioned you instead of understanding you. They distanced themselves instead of growing with you. They spoke around you instead of speaking to you. And this is where the hidden battle intensified. Because now it wasn't just misunderstanding, it became narrative. A quiet storyline forming in spaces you were not part of. A version of you being discussed, shaped, and repeated without your voice present to correct it. And the more it circulated, the more it began to influence how people saw you, how they responded to you, how they treated you. And suddenly, you were dealing with reactions that didn't match your reality. You felt judged without explanation. You felt tension without cause. You felt distance without clarity. And it left you confused. But let this settle into your spirit now. What was happening around you was never a reflection of your truth. It was a reflection of their perception. And perception, when it is rooted in insecurity, will always distort reality. This is why things felt so heavy. Not because you were doing something wrong, but because you were being pulled into something that was never aligned with who you truly are. You were standing in the middle of a situation where truth and assumption were colliding, and for a moment, it felt like assumption was winning. But here is what they did not understand. While they were building their version of you in the dark, God was preserving the truth of you in the light. While they were creating confusion, God was preparing clarity. While they were observing your reactions, God was strengthening your restraint. Because this was never about you defending yourself. It was about you being revealed at the right time. And the time is approaching. What was hidden is not going to stay hidden. What was spoken in quiet places is not going to remain silent. And the same situation that made you question yourself is about to show you exactly why it happened the way it did. You were not being pushed out. You were being pulled away. You were not being misunderstood by accident. You were being separated with purpose. And as you begin to see this clearly, something inside you will shift again. Not confusion this time, but confidence. Not doubt, but discernment. Because now you're starting to understand this was never just about people. It was positioning. And what comes next will reveal why everything had to unfold this way. Type ISE clearly now in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 2222 is now activated. There was a moment, and you know exactly which one this is, when everything inside you felt like it reached its limit. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, quite like something within you was wearing down piece by piece. You kept going on the outside. You showed up. You responded. You handled what needed to be handled. But internally, something was shifting, and it didn't feel like strength anymore. It felt like exhaustion. This was the moment where the weight of everything you had been carrying finally became undeniable. You weren't just dealing with one situation, but with the accumulation, the repeated misunderstandings, the silent tension, the feeling of being overlooked, misjudged, or even replaced in spaces where you once felt secure. And the hardest part wasn't even what people did, it was what it made you feel about yourself. You started asking questions you never used to ask. Questions like, Am I the problem? Did I do something wrong? Why does this keep happening to me? And those questions didn't come from clarity. They came from pain. Because when you're constantly put in situations where things don't make sense, your mind tries to create answers just to find peace. And sometimes the easiest answer becomes blaming yourself. So you adjusted. You became quieter, more careful, more observant. You started choosing your words more cautiously. You avoided certain conversations. You pulled back from expressing yourself fully, not because you lost your voice, but because you were trying to protect your peace. But even that didn't feel like enough. Because the more you adjusted, the more disconnected you felt from who you truly are. And that's when it hit you. A deep, heavy realization that maybe, just maybe, you were tired of holding everything together. Tired of being the one who understands. Tired of being the one who lets things go. Tired of being the one who stays strong when no one else even notices the weight you're carrying. And in that moment, something inside you whispered, "What if I just stopped trying?" Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way anyone else could see. But internally, there was a moment where you felt like letting go of everything, your effort, your patience, your belief that things would get better. You didn't want to fight anymore. You didn't want to explain yourself anymore. You didn't even want to care as deeply as you always have. That was your breaking point. And what makes this moment so powerful is that no one really saw it. To everyone else, you were still functioning, still moving, still okay. But inside, you were standing at the edge of giving up, not on life, but on the expectation that things would finally make sense. You were losing the energy to keep hoping. But here is what you didn't realize at that exact moment. That breaking point was not the end of your strength. It was the end of your old way of carrying things. Because sometimes, the version of you that keeps everything together is also the version that holds on to things far longer than you should. The version that tolerates more than necessary. The version that tries to fix what was never yours to fix. And that version of you had to reach its limit. Not to destroy you, but to release you. Because what felt like you were falling apart was actually you being pulled out of a space that could no longer hold who you are becoming. You see, when you reached that point where you felt like you couldn't keep doing things the same way, something shifted, even if you didn't notice it immediately. You started observing more than reacting. You started distancing without needing to explain. You started protecting your energy in ways you never did before. And even though it felt like withdrawal, it was actually awareness. The breaking point was the moment you stopped forcing what wasn't flowing. The moment you stopped overextending yourself for people who were no longer aligned. The moment you stopped trying to make sense of what was never meant to be understood at your level. And here's the truth that changes everything. When you thought you were losing your strength, you were actually reclaiming it. Because real strength is not in holding everything together at your own expense. Real strength is knowing when something is no longer yours to carry. And that moment, as painful and confusing as it felt, with the exact moment everything began to shift in your favor. Not visibly yet. Not externally yet. But internally, the foundation was changing. You were no longer operating from survival. You were stepping into awareness. And awareness changes everything. Because once you see clearly, you can never go back to pretending things are the same. And now, you are no longer at that breaking point. You are beyond it. You are standing in the space that comes after. The space where things begin to make sense, where clarity replaces confusion, where you start to understand why everything had to unfold the way it did. And what's coming next will show you that your breaking point was not where you lost. It was where everything quietly began to turn in your favor. Type I didn't break, I transformed in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 3333 is now activated. As this message reaches your spirit, understand this. Every word you are hearing is not just for you. It is meant to reach others who are still standing at their breaking point, still searching for clarity in their pain. When you choose to support this mission, you are not giving to a channel. You are helping light reach someone who feels lost in their darkness. The word says that when you sow, you will also reap, and right now, your seed becomes a voice, a signal, a lifeline for someone who is about to give up. I feel it strongly. This is your moment to act, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. Your support through the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on your screen becomes part of a greater assignment that heaven is unfolding. As you give, you are not losing anything. You are unlocking flow, opening doors, and positioning yourself under divine increase. Step into this moment with intention. Sow where your spirit is being fed, and watch how God responds to your obedience. There is something you need to understand now, and you need to let it settle deeply into your spirit, because this truth will begin to heal what confusion once disturbed. Nothing you went through was ignored. Nothing you felt was overlooked. Not a single moment, no matter how small, no matter how silent, escaped the awareness of heaven. When you were trying to hold yourself together, when you were questioning your worth, while you were wondering why things were unfolding the way they were, there was a higher perspective observing everything with precision and clarity. Every word that was spoken about you, every action taken behind your back, every intention, whether pure or distorted, was seen in full. You may have felt unseen in those moments. You may have felt like your silence went unnoticed, like your restraint was unappreciated, like your effort was invisible. But what you could not see was that your silence was being recorded as strength. Your restraint was being recognized as discipline. Your decision not to react, even when you had every reason to, was being marked as maturity. And that matters more than you realize. Because there is a difference between being overlooked by people and being acknowledged by God. People may miss details. They may misunderstand situations. They may judge based on fragments of information. But God sees the full picture. He sees what happened before the conversation, during the moment, and long after everything appeared to settle. He saw how you chose peace when conflict would have been easier. He saw how you held back words that could have escalated everything. He saw how you walked away from situations that could have pulled you into something unnecessary. And most importantly, he saw what it cost you to do that. Because choosing peace is not always easy. Choosing silence is not always comfortable. Choosing restraint often requires more strength than reacting ever would. And you carried that weight quietly, without recognition, without validation, without anyone fully understanding what it took for you to respond the way you did. But heaven understood. And while it may have seemed like nothing was happening, while it may have felt like the situation was left unresolved, something was actually being established behind the scenes. A record, a balance, a clear distinction between truth and perception. Because the same way your actions were being observed, so were theirs. Every misinterpretation, every assumption, every moment where your character was questioned without cause, none of it was ignored. Not in a way that creates punishment, but in a way that preserves truth. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because when truth is preserved, it does not stay hidden forever. It waits. It aligns. It unfolds at the right time, in the right way, for the right reason. You may have wondered why things were not immediately corrected, why misunderstandings were not instantly clarified, why situations seem to linger without resolution. But the reason is this: timing matters. Immediate reactions often create more confusion. Immediate exposure often leads to more resistance. But delayed clarity creates undeniable understanding. And that is what is being prepared for you. A moment where things will no longer need explanation. A moment where what was once unclear becomes obvious. A moment where you will not have to defend yourself, because the truth will speak on its own. This is not about proving anything to anyone. This is about alignment revealing itself naturally. Because when something is built on misunderstanding, it cannot sustain itself forever. Eventually, it begins to show its cracks. And when it does, people start to see things differently. They begin to notice inconsistencies. They begin to question narratives they once accepted. They begin to realize that what they believed may not have been the full truth. And when that realization happens, it doesn't come from you forcing it. It comes from truth surfacing on its own. That is why you were not meant to fight this battle the way you thought you should. That is why you were not meant to chase explanations or demand clarity from people who were not ready to see it. Because your role was never to convince, it was to remain consistent. Consistent in who you are. Consistent in your values. Consistent in your alignment. Because consistency, over time, reveals truth more powerfully than any argument ever could. And now, you are approaching the point where everything you held together in silence will begin to make sense in the open. Not in a dramatic or chaotic way, but in a clear, undeniable shift where things begin to fall into place. You will start to see why certain people distance themselves. You will start to understand why certain situations unfolded the way they did. You will start to recognize that what once felt like confusion was actually preparation. Because while you were focused on what you lost, heaven was focused on what needed to be preserved. Your character, your peace, your direction. And now that those things remain intact, despite everything you went through, you are in a position that is far more stable than you realize. You are no longer reacting from emotion. You are no longer questioning your worth. You are no longer seeking validation from spaces that could not provide it. You are grounded. And from that place, everything begins to shift in your favor. Because when you are aligned internally, external situations begin to reflect that alignment. What once felt chaotic starts to organize itself. What once felt unclear begins to reveal its purpose. And this is only the beginning of that process. What comes next will show you how the situation that once felt like it was working against you is now being repositioned to work for you in ways you could not have anticipated. Type "I trust the process" in the comments if you receive this message. Lesson code 4444 is now activated. Now this is where everything begins to turn in a way you did not expect. Because up until this point, it may have felt like you were the one absorbing everything. The misunderstanding, the pressure, the silence, the emotional weight. You carried it, you processed it, and you moved through it without ever truly seeing resolution. It may have seemed like things were left unbalanced, like what was done was never corrected, like what was said was never addressed. But what you could not see was that nothing was left unresolved. It was simply being handled in a way that did not require your interference. Because there comes a moment when situations move beyond human correction and enter divine order. A moment where things are no longer dependent on conversations, explanations, or confrontations. A moment where everything that has been building quietly begins to shift into alignment on its own. And that is the moment you are approaching now. You see, when people act from misunderstanding, from insecurity, or from distorted perception, they believe they are operating in control. They believe they understand the situation clearly. They believe their actions are justified, their conclusions are accurate, and their decisions are valid. But what they do not realize is that when their actions are not aligned with truth, they begin to create outcomes they cannot control. Not immediately, not visibly at first, but gradually. Because misalignment carries consequences, not as punishment, but as correction. And that correction is already in motion. The same energy that was directed toward you is now beginning to shift direction. The same narrative that was formed without your voice is beginning to lose its structure. The same assumptions that were made about you are beginning to face reality in ways that cannot be ignored. And this is not something you need to initiate. It is not something you need to accelerate. It is not something you need to involve yourself in at all. Because the trap was never set for you. It was set by them. Through their own actions. Through their own words. Through their own decisions made without full understanding. And now, those very things are beginning to return, not in a dramatic or chaotic way, but in a precise and undeniable unfolding of truth. You may begin to notice small shifts at first. People who once seemed certain may start to hesitate. Conversations that once excluded you may begin to include questions. Energy that once felt distant may begin to change tone. This is not coincidence. This is alignment correcting itself. Because when something is built on assumption, it cannot hold under the weight of truth. And when truth begins to surface, it does not need force, it reveals itself naturally. This is why you were never meant to defend yourself aggressively. This is why you were never meant to chase clarity from people who were not ready to see it. Because if clarity is forced too early, it is rejected. But when it arrives through realization, it is accepted. And that realization is beginning. You may not hear it directly at first. You may not see immediate acknowledgement. But behind the scenes, perspectives are shifting. Thoughts are being reconsidered. Moments are being replayed, not from assumption this time, but from awareness. And when awareness enters, everything changes. Because now, people are no longer reacting based on incomplete understanding. They are beginning to see patterns. They are beginning to connect details. They are beginning to recognize that what they believed may not align with what is actually true. And that is where the shift becomes irreversible. Because once someone sees truth clearly, they cannot return to the illusion they once accepted. This is what divine justice looks like. Not loud, not forced, not reactive, but precise. It does not rush. It does not panic. It does not seek validation. It simply aligns everything in a way where truth becomes undeniable and outcomes reflect that truth naturally. And the most powerful part of this is that you remain untouched by the chaos of it. You are not being pulled back into conflict. You are not being drawn into explanation. You are not being placed in a position where you have to defend or justify yourself. Instead, you are being positioned outside of it, observing rather than reacting, understanding rather than questioning, moving forward rather than looking back. Because the trap that was created was never designed with full awareness. And now that awareness is entering the situation, the structure of that trap cannot hold. It begins to collapse under its own weight. And as it does, something else begins to rise. Clarity. Not yes for others, but for you. You begin to see why certain things had to happen. You begin to understand why you were removed from certain dynamics. You begin to recognize that what felt like loss was actually protection. Because if you had stayed in that space, you would have been pulled into something that was never meant for your path. But now, you are no longer in that position. You are beyond it. And as everything continues to unfold, you will see clearly that what once felt like it was working against you is now working in a way that supports your growth, your clarity, and your direction. This is not the end of the situation. This is the turning point. And what comes next will show you exactly how everything that was meant to hold you back is now being used to move you forward. Type "Justice is working for me" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 5555 is now activated. Now this is the part where the shift becomes undeniable. Because everything that has been building quietly, everything that has been aligning behind the scenes, is no longer just a process. It is beginning to produce visible results. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in a way that is precise, controlled, and impossible to ignore once it starts unfolding. You have to understand something very clearly now. What was done against you was never as powerful as they believed it to be. It may have affected your emotions for a moment. It may have slowed you down temporarily. It may have caused confusion, hesitation, or even self-doubt. But it never had the authority to define your outcome. And that is exactly where everything begins to reverse. Because when actions are rooted in distortion, when decisions are made from incomplete understanding, and when intentions are influenced by insecurity rather than clarity, the results can never sustain themselves. They may appear effective in the beginning, but over time, they begin to unravel. And that unraveling has already begun. What they thought would isolate you is now refining you. What they assumed would weaken you is now strengthening your awareness. What they believed would silence you is now sharpening your clarity. The very things that were meant to limit you have instead created space for you to see more clearly, move more intentionally, and detach from what no longer aligns. And here is the part they did not expect. While they were focused on controlling how you were perceived, they lost control of how their own actions would eventually be revealed. Because when someone operates from assumption rather than truth, they are building something unstable. It may hold for a while, but it cannot withstand reality when it fully surfaces. And now, reality is beginning to show itself. You may start to notice it in subtle ways. Moments where things they said no longer align with what is being observed. Situations where their version of events begins to contradict itself. Interactions where others start to question what they once accepted without hesitation. This is not coincidence. This is exposure through consistency. Because you did something they did not account for, you remained consistent. You did not shift your values to match the situation. You did not react impulsively to defend yourself. You did not allow confusion to alter who you are at your core. And consistency has power. It creates a steady contrast against instability. It allows truth to stand without needing to be forced. It reveals differences without confrontation. And over time, that contrast becomes impossible to ignore. And now, what they built is being compared against what you maintained. And that comparison is where everything begins to change. Because people may accept a narrative for a period of time, but they cannot ignore patterns forever. Eventually, they begin to observe more closely. They begin to question more deeply. They begin to recognize when something does not add up. And when that realization happens, it does not require you to step in. It unfolds naturally. This is the moment where what was meant to work against you begins to work in your favor, not because anything new was created, but because what already existed is now being seen clearly. Their assumptions are being challenged. Their conclusions are being reconsidered. Their certainty is beginning to shift. And as that shift continues, something else begins to happen. The weight they attempted to place on you begins to return, not as punishment, but as responsibility. Responsibility to face the reality of what was said, what was done, and how it aligns with truth. Because once awareness is present, accountability follows. And accountability cannot be avoided when clarity is undeniable. You may not hear direct acknowledgement immediately. You may not receive apologies right away. But you will begin to feel the shift. The energy will change. The tension will transform. The dynamic will no longer feel the same. Because what was once operating in distortion is now being corrected by truth. And you remain unaffected by the instability of that correction. You are not being pulled back into confusion. You are not being drawn into explanation. You are not being placed in a position where you need to revisit what you have already moved beyond. Instead, you are being elevated out of it. Because while everything else is adjusting, you have already aligned. And that alignment is what keeps you steady while everything else is shifting. Now, as this continues to unfold, you will begin to understand something even more clearly. What they meant for disruption became your direction. What they intended as limitation became your separation from what was not meant for you. What they thought would end your momentum actually redirected it towards something more aligned. And that is the part they could not control. Because once something is redirected by purpose, it cannot be forced back into what it has outgrown. And you have outgrown that space. You have outgrown that dynamic. You have outgrown the version of yourself that would have stayed and tried to fix it. Now, you are moving differently. With clarity. With awareness. With intention. And because of that, everything that unfolds from this point forward will reflect that shift. This is not just a reversal. This is a realignment. And what comes next will show you why everything you went through was necessary, not just to move you forward, but to prepare you for what you are stepping into next. Type IT turned in my favor in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 6666 is now activated. Now this is where everything begins to make sense in a way it never has before. Because up until now you've been looking at what happened through the lens of experience. What you felt, what you saw, what you went through. But this next part shifts your perspective completely. It moves you from asking why did this happen to me, to understanding why this had to happen for me. Because there was a purpose behind every moment you thought was pointless. Loving you went through was wasted. Not the confusion. Not the silence. Not the distance. Not even the pain. It all served a function that you could not see while you were in it. And that function was not to break you, it was to elevate you. You see, elevation does not always begin with opportunity. It often begins with separation. Separation from environments that no longer align. Separation from dynamics that limit your growth. Separation from people who are connected to who you were but not who you are becoming. And that separation rarely feels comfortable. It feels like loss. It feels like rejection. It feels like things are falling apart without explanation. But in reality, it is the first stage of being repositioned. Because you cannot rise into a new level while remaining attached to what belongs to your old one. And this is exactly what was happening. What you experienced was not just a series of events, it was a transition. A transition out of one version of your life and into another. But transitions are not always clear when you are in the middle of them. They feel uncertain. They feel unstable. They feel like you are losing control. And that is because control is being replaced with alignment. You were being moved out of spaces where your value was not fully recognized. Out of situations where your energy was being drained instead of supported. Out of environments where your presence was tolerated, but not truly appreciated. And the only way that could happen completely was through disruption. Because if everything had remained comfortable, you would have stayed. If everything had continued smoothly, you would have remained connected. If nothing had challenged you, you would not have questioned whether you were in the right place. So the disruption was necessary, not to hurt you, but to move you. And now, as you look back, you can begin to see it more clearly. The things that once made you feel uncertain are now the things that gave you awareness. The situations that once made you question yourself are now the ones that helped you understand your boundaries. The moments that felt like endings are now revealing themselves as redirections. Because elevation requires clarity, and clarity often comes through contrast. You had to experience what did not align to recognize what truly does. You had to feel what was draining to understand what supports you. You had to go through environments where you felt misunderstood to fully step into spaces where you are seen clearly. That is not coincidence. That is preparation. Because where you are going next requires a different level of awareness than where you have been. It requires you to move with intention, to recognize alignment, to trust your perception without constantly questioning it. And now, you are in that position. You are no longer reacting the same way. You are no longer tolerating the same things. You are no longer seeking the same validation. Something in you has shifted, and that shift is not temporary. It is foundational. Because you are no longer operating from who you used to be. You are operating from who you are becoming. And who you are becoming cannot return to environments that require you to shrink, cannot remain in dynamics that create confusion, cannot continue in spaces where your presence is not aligned with your purpose. So what felt like loss was actually release. What felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like everything falling apart was actually everything being rearranged. And now, the elevation that was being prepared quietly is beginning to reveal itself. Not all at once, not in a way that overwhelms you, but in steady, clear, intentional steps forward. You will begin to notice new opportunities aligning differently, new connections forming more naturally, new clarity guiding your decisions without hesitation. Because you are no longer moving from confusion. You are moving from awareness. And awareness changes everything. It allows you to recognize what aligns without needing to force it. It allows you to move forward without constantly looking back. It allows you to trust your direction without needing constant reassurance. And that is what elevation looks like. Not sudden, chaotic change, but steady, aligned movement. You are not where you were. You are not who you were. And you are not going back. Because everything you went through has already shifted you into a different position. A position where you are no longer trying to hold things together that were never meant to stay. A position where you are no longer questioning your worth based on how others perceive you. A position where you are no longer waiting for clarity, because clarity is now within you. And from this place, everything begins to move forward in a way that is aligned, intentional, and undeniable. This is your elevation, and it has already begun. Type "I am rising into alignment" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 7777 is now activated. There is a shift happening in your life right now that cannot be ignored anymore. You have felt it, even if you have not fully understood it. The distance, the silence, the sudden change in dynamics that once felt stable. People who used to be present now feel absent. Conversations that once flowed easily now feel forced or non-existent. And deep inside, there has been a question forming again and again. Why is this happening? But now, the answer is becoming clear. This is not random distance. This is not accidental disconnection. This is not something you caused by mistake. This is a season of separation, and it is intentional. Because not everyone who was part of your past is meant to walk into your future. And that truth is not always easy to accept. You may have tried to hold on to certain connections. You may have tried to maintain relationships out of loyalty, history, or understanding. You may have told yourself that things could go back to how they were if you just gave it time, if you just stayed patient, if you just kept showing up the same way you always have. But something inside you knows that things are no longer the same. The energy has changed. The alignment has shifted. And no matter how much you try to maintain what used to be, it does not feel natural anymore. That is because you are not the same person anymore. You have grown. You have evolved. You have gained awareness that you did not have before. And with that awareness comes a new level of discernment, one that no longer allows you to stay connected to what drains you, confuses you, or misaligns with your direction. And this is where separation begins. Not always through conflict, not always through clear endings, but often through quiet distance, through less communication, through less engagement, through a gradual shift where what once felt necessary no longer feels aligned, and that can feel uncomfortable, because separation does not always come with closure. It does not always come with explanations. It does not always come with mutual understanding. Sometimes it just happens, and you are left trying to process it, trying to understand why people who once mattered deeply are no longer present in the same way, trying to figure out whether you should reach out, hold on, or let go. But here is what you need to understand. Not every separation is meant to be resisted. Some separations are protection, because when your path begins to change, when your awareness begins to expand, when your direction begins to align differently, there are certain connections that can no longer remain without creating imbalance. And if they remain, they will slow you down. They will pull you back into old patterns. They will reintroduce confusion where clarity has already been established. They will require you to adjust yourself in ways that no longer feel natural. And that is not where you are meant to stay. So instead of forcing those connections to continue, they are being removed. Not in a harsh or dramatic way, but in a way that allows you to move forward without resistance. You may notice that you no longer feel the same urge to explain yourself. You no longer feel the need to maintain certain conversations. You no longer feel responsible for keeping certain dynamics intact. That is not disconnection. That is alignment. Because when something is no longer meant for you, your energy will naturally begin to withdraw from it. And that withdrawal is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is your awareness recognizing what your past self would have continued holding on to. And now, you are no longer holding on. You are allowing distance where distance is needed, allowing silence where silence is natural, allowing things to shift without trying to control the outcome. And in that allowing, something powerful happens. You create space. Space for clarity. Space for new connections that align with who you are now. Space for opportunities that match your direction instead of conflicting with it. Because you cannot receive what is meant for your next level if your energy is still tied to what belongs to your previous one. And this is why this season is necessary. It is not about losing people. It is about gaining alignment. It is about ensuring that what remains in your life supports where you are going, not where you have been. And while it may feel uncomfortable at times, while it may bring moments of reflection or even sadness, it is leading you towards something more stable, more clear, and more aligned than what you are leaving behind. You are not being left. You are being led. And the more you allow this process to unfold without resistance, the more you will begin to see that what is leaving your life is making room for something that fits you better. something that understands you more clearly, something that does not require you to adjust who you are in order to belong. This is your separation season, and it is not working against you. It is working for you. Type "I release what no longer aligns" in the comments if you receive this message. Lesson code 8888 is now activated. As this message continues to unfold, understand that what you are receiving is not just insight. It is alignment being activated in real time, not only for you, but for countless others who are still holding on to what they were never meant to carry. When you choose to support this mission, you are helping this message reach those who are still in their confusion, still in their breaking point, still searching for clarity they cannot yet find on their own. The word declares that those who sow into good ground will see their harvest multiply, and right now, this is fertile ground for transformation. I feel this strongly. This is your moment to act with intention, to step forward in obedience, and to become part of something greater than yourself. Your support through the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on your screen is not just a transaction. It is a spiritual seed that carries impact far beyond what you can see. As you give, you are opening doors, shifting atmospheres, and positioning yourself within the flow of divine increase. Step into this moment with clarity. Sow into what is feeding your spirit, and watch how God moves in response. Now this is the moment where everything that has been building quietly begins to surface in a way that can no longer be ignored. Because truth, no matter how long it is delayed, has a way of revealing itself when the timing is right. And the timing is no longer distant. It is approaching faster than you think. Up until now, much of what you experienced has existed beneath the surface. The misunderstandings, the assumptions, the quiet narratives that formed without your presence, none of it was fully visible. It operated in subtle ways, in conversations you were not part of, in perceptions you could not directly correct. And because of that, it felt like something was happening without resolution. But what was hidden was never meant to stay hidden. Because truth does not disappear. It waits. It waits until the environment is ready. It waits until the right moment aligns. It waits until clarity can be received without resistance. And now, that moment is beginning. You may not see it all at once, but you will start to notice it in pieces. Small realizations forming in others. Subtle changes in how people interact with you. A shift in tone, in energy, in awareness. Things that once felt certain, others will begin to feel uncertain. Things that were once accepted without question will begin to be examined more closely. And this is where exposure begins, not through confrontation, but through realization. Because when people begin to see things clearly on their own, the impact is far greater than anything you could have explained to them. When truth becomes their realization instead of your defense, it carries weight that cannot be dismissed. This is why you were never meant to force anything. This is why you were never meant to chase correction. Because forced truth is resisted, but reeling truth is accepted. And what is happening now is the process of realization. People are beginning to revisit moments, to rethink conversations, to notice inconsistencies that were once overlooked, to connect details that did not seem significant before. And as those connections form, something shifts. Perception begins to align with reality. And when that alignment happens, everything changes. Because now, what was once hidden in assumption is being brought into clarity. What was once misunderstood is being seen differently. What was once accepted as truth is being questioned. And you are not the one initiating this. You are simply witnessing. That is the power of allowing truth to unfold naturally. It removes you from the position of having to defend yourself and places you in the position of being revealed without effort. And as this continues, something else will become clear to you. The same people who once held a certain perception of you will begin to adjust that perception, not because you asked them to, but because they can no longer ignore what is becoming evident. You may notice changes in behavior, a different tone in conversations, a shift in how people approach you. It may not be immediate acknowledgement, but it will be noticeable, because awareness cannot be reversed once it is established. And with awareness comes accountability, not always expressed directly, not always verbalized openly, but it exists in the way people begin to move differently, speak differently, and respond differently. And this is where everything begins to settle. Because once truth is visible, there is no longer a need for tension. There is no longer a need for confusion. There is no longer a need for you to question what really happened. It becomes clear, not through explanation, but through observation. And as this clarity unfolds, you will also gain something just as important. Boo. Not the kind that comes from conversations or apologies, but the kind that comes from understanding. The kind that allows you to move forward without needing anything from the past to be resolved in a specific way. Because now you see it. You see why things unfolded the way they did. You see why certain people behaved the way they did. You see why you felt the way you felt. And that understanding releases you. It frees you from replaying situations in your mind. It frees you from trying to make sense of what no longer needs to be analyzed. It frees you from carrying questions that no longer require answers. Because clarity has replaced confusion. And with that clarity, you are no longer connected to the weight of what happened. You are only connected to the lesson. And that lesson is what prepares you for what comes next. Because exposure is not just about revealing others. It is also about revealing truth to you in a way that strengthens your discernment moving forward. You will not move the same way again. You will not overlook the same signs again. You will not ignore your awareness again. Because now you trust what you see, and that trust changes everything. This is not the end of the process. This is the moment where everything becomes clear enough for you to move forward without hesitation. And what comes next will show you how everything that was once unclear is now being replaced with restoration. Type "The truth is revealed" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 9999 is now activated. Now this is where everything begins to come back into alignment in a way that you may not have expected, but deep down, you always hoped for. Because after everything you have experienced, after the confusion, the separation, the exposure, there comes a moment where restoration begins. Not as an idea, not as a distant possibility, but as a real and active process unfolding in your life. You have to understand this clearly. Nothing that was truly meant for you was ever permanently lost. It may have been delayed. It may have been redirected. It may have been temporarily blocked by circumstances or people. But it was never erased. Because what is aligned with your path does not disappear. It waits for the right conditions to return. And now, those conditions are forming. Everything that felt like it was taken from you, your peace, your clarity, your confidence, your sense of stability, is beginning to return, not in fragments, but in a stronger, more refined form than it existed before. Because restoration does not simply bring things back the way they were. It rebuilds them better. Stronger boundaries than before. Clearer vision than before. Deeper awareness than before. You are not returning to your old state. You are stepping into a new one that carries the lessons of everything you have been through. And this is what makes your restoration powerful. Because now, what you receive, you will know how to protect. What you gain, you will know how to maintain. What you build, you will know how to sustain. This is not accidental. This is preparation meeting opportunity. You may begin to notice it in subtle ways at first. A sense of calm replacing what used to feel overwhelming. Decisions becoming easier where they once felt confusing. Opportunities appearing that feel aligned instead of forced. Conversations that feel natural instead of strained. These are not random improvements. They are indicators that alignment has been restored. Because when you are no longer entangled in confusion, when you are no longer connected to what was draining you, your energy shifts. And when your energy shifts, your experiences begin to reflect that shift. What once felt blocked begins to open. What once felt uncertain begins to stabilize. What once felt distant begins to come closer. And this includes things you thought you had lost completely. Opportunities you assumed had passed. Connections you believed were no longer possible. Paths you thought were closed permanently. You will begin to see that not everything was taken. Some things were simply being repositioned. Because if they had come to you at the time you expected, you would not have been ready to receive them fully. You would have still been navigating confusion. You would have still been connected to environments that could not support what was meant for you. But now, you are different. Now you are clear. Now you are aware. And because of that, what returns will meet you at a higher level of understanding. This is why restoration often feels unexpected. It does not always come in the form you originally imagined. It does not always return through the same channels it left. But it arrives in a way that aligns with who you are now, not who you were then. And that difference is what makes it sustainable. You are no longer trying to rebuild what was. You are creating something new, something stronger, something that reflects your growth. And as this continues to unfold, you will begin to recognize something even more important. What you thought you lost was never meant to define your future. It was part of your transition, a necessary stage that allowed you to release what could not move forward with you, so that what truly belongs to you could return without interference. And now, that return is happening. Not all at once, but steadily. Not loudly, but clearly. Not forcefully, but naturally. Because when something is aligned, it does not need to be chased. You rise, and you are in a position now where you no longer need to chase what is meant for you. You are attracting it through alignment, through clarity, through the version of yourself that has already been shaped by everything you went through. And that is what makes this restoration permanent. You are not going back to what was. You are stepping into what is meant to last. And as you continue forward, you will see more and more evidence of this alignment appearing in your life. Opportunities, connections, clarity, and peace that reflect the shift that has already taken place within you. This is your restoration, and it has already begun. Type "what is mine" returns in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1010 is now activated. Now this is where everything becomes undeniable, not just in what is happening around you, but in who you have become through it all. Because after the exposure, after the separation, after the restoration begins to take form, there is one final shift that changes everything at its core. It is not external. It is internal. It is the realization that you are no longer the same person who walked into that situation. And that realization carries power. Because for a long time, part of the struggle you experienced came from trying to hold on to an identity that was no longer aligned with your growth. You were still trying to show up the same way, respond the same way, understand the same way, even as everything around you was shifting. But now, something has changed. You no longer see things the same way. You no longer interpret situations the same way. You no longer respond from the same place. And that is not accidental. That is transformation. Because what you went through did not just remove things from your life. It reshaped how you see yourself within it. It forced you to confront parts of yourself that were operating from habit rather than awareness. It showed you where you were overextending, where you were over-explaining, where you were tolerating more than you should have. And now, you are no longer operating from that place. You are no longer seeking to be understood by everyone. You are no longer adjusting yourself to maintain connections that feel forced. You are no longer questioning your worth based on how others perceive you. Because now, your sense of identity is not external. It is grounded within you. And that changes everything. Because when your identity is internally established, it cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. It cannot be distorted by someone else's perception. It cannot be weakened by misunderstanding. It remains steady. And that steadiness is what separates who you were from who you are now. Before, you may have felt the need to explain yourself, to correct every misunderstanding, to make sure people saw your intentions clearly. But now, you understand something deeper. Not everyone needs to understand you for you to remain aligned. Not everyone needs to agree with you for you to move forward. Not everyone needs to stay connected to you for you to continue growing. And once you understand that, you stop trying to hold on to what is no longer meant to stay. You begin to move with clarity instead of confusion. You begin to choose alignment over familiarity. You begin to prioritize your peace without feeling the need to justify it. And that is where your new identity becomes visible, not just to others, but to you. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to recognize your own patterns more clearly. You begin to see situations for what they are without needing time to process confusion. And that level of awareness creates a different kind of presence. A presence that does not need to prove itself. A presence that does not need validation. A presence that is grounded, clear, and intentional. This is who you are now. And this is who they could not break. They may have thought that the pressure would change you in a way that made you smaller, weaker, or less certain. They may have believed that the confusion would cause you to lose your direction. They may have assumed that the situation would leave you stuck in doubt. But instead, it did the opposite. It clarified you. It strengthened you. It aligned you. Because what they saw as a breaking point was actually a transformation point. A moment where the version of you that was tied to external validation, external stability, and external understanding began to dissolve. And in its place, a new version emerged. A version that moves with awareness. A version that does not ignore what it senses. A version that does not remain where it is not aligned. And that version of you cannot return to what you have already outgrown. You cannot go back to questioning yourself the same way. You cannot go back to tolerating the same patterns. You cannot go back to shrinking your presence to fit into spaces that do not recognize your value. Because now, you know. And once you know, everything changes. You move differently. You choose differently. You align differently. And that alignment is what will continue to shape everything that comes next in your life. This is not just growth. This is identity transformation. And it is permanent. You are not who they thought you were. You are not who they tried to reduce you to. You are not who the situation attempted to define. You are who you have become through it. And that version of you is stronger, clearer, and more aligned than ever before. This is your new identity, and it cannot be undone. Type "I know who I am now" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1111 is now activated. Now this is the moment where everything comes together, and you must pay attention more than ever before, because everything you have heard, everything you have felt, everything that has been unfolding in your life is not just information. It is activation. It is a call. It is a defining moment where you either step fully into alignment or slowly drift back into what you have already been released from. And this is where the urgency becomes real, because not every moment carries the same weight. Not every season holds the same opportunity. There are windows, specific, precise windows, where everything is aligned for movement, for change, for breakthrough. And when those windows open, they require response, not hesitation, not delay, not overthinking. Response. You are standing in one of those moments right now. You have been shown what was hidden. You have been removed from what was misaligned. You have been guided into clarity. You have been strengthened through everything that tried to weaken you. And now, you are in a position where your next steps will determine how everything unfolds from here. Because here is the truth you cannot ignore. Awareness without action leads back to confusion. You cannot return to what you now see clearly. You cannot go back to tolerating what you now recognize as misaligned. You cannot reattach yourself to environments, conversations, or dynamics that you already know do not support who you have become. Because if you do, the cycle repeats. Not because you are meant to suffer, but because you are choosing familiarity over alignment. And this is the warning. Do not go back. Do not reconnect in ways that pull you out of clarity. Do not reopen doors that were closed through growth. Do not allow temporary emotions to lead you back into permanent patterns that you have already outgrown. Because everything that has happened was not random. It was preparation. Preparation for a level of awareness that requires discipline. Preparation for direction that requires consistency. Preparation for a life that requires you to move differently than you did before. And now, you must honor that preparation. You must honor the version of yourself that has already changed. You must honor the clarity that has already been given to you. You must honor the separation that has already taken place. Because what you do next will either strengthen your alignment or weaken it. And this is where many people fall back. Not because they lack understanding, but because they hesitate to fully step into it. They feel the shift, but they do not trust it. They see the truth, but they question it. They experience the change, but they resist committing to it. And in that hesitation, they slowly drift back into what they were meant to leave behind. But that is not what you are going to do. Because you did not go through everything you went through just to return to the same place. You did not gain this level of awareness just to ignore it. You did not reach this point of clarity just to doubt it. You are here because you are ready. Ready to move forward without looking back. Ready to trust what you see without needing confirmation. Ready to walk in alignment without hesitation. And when you do that, everything changes. Because alignment is not passive. It is active. It is the daily decision to move in a way that reflects who you have become. It is the consistent choice to protect your peace, your clarity, and your direction. It is the willingness to let go of anything that does not support your next level. And when you live that way, you do not miss what is meant for you. You step directly into it. This is your activation. This is the moment where everything you have learned becomes everything you live. And what is ahead of you now is not confusion, not instability, not uncertainty. It is clarity. It is direction. It is alignment. But only if you choose it. So stay aware. Stay grounded. Stay aligned. Because everything is already in motion. And what comes next depends on how you respond now. Type "I stay aligned" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1212 is now activated. And as this message reaches its final moment, understand this: what has been spoken here is not just for you to hear. It is for others who are still searching, still struggling, still standing in confusion without direction. Every time you choose to support this mission, you are sowing a seed into souls that are waiting for light to reach them. The word declares that when you give, it shall be given back to you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And this is not theory. This is a living promise being activated through your obedience. I feel this strongly. This is your moment to respond, not casually, but intentionally, because what you release today becomes part of someone else's breakthrough tomorrow. Your support through the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on your screen is not just a contribution. It is a divine act that multiplies impact far beyond what you can see. As you give, you are stepping into flow, into alignment, into a greater assignment that heaven is orchestrating right now. Do not hesitate. Act in faith, sow with purpose, and position yourself within the cycle of divine increase.